Marcus Hayes never expected that helping a frail stranger on a stormy evening would change everything. As a struggling black single dad trying to get home to his little daughter, he simply couldn't walk past an elderly man collapsing under the weight of his groceries. But the lonely old man wasn't who he appeared to be. Behind the gates of a silent mansion waited a truth that would pull Marcus into a battle against greed, lies, and betrayal. Before it was over, his courage would save innocent lives, restore a broken community, and teach two fathers that family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the one kindness brings into your life. By the time Marcus Hayes shut the service van's squeaky door, the sky had already turned the dull gray that always seemed to come before a hard October rain. His shoulders ached from spending 10 straight hours crawling through crawl spaces and replacing old furnace parts in homes that never seemed to stay fixed for long. He glanced at the fuel gauge, then at the 2 crumpled dollar bills and loose change resting in the center console. Enough to get home. Maybe. His phone buzzed before he could start the engine. "Mr. Hayes?" a gentle voice asked. It was Mrs. Donovan from Lily's after-school center. Marcus closed his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly before she even finished. "Lily's fine," she replied, trying to sound cheerful. "She's coloring while she waits. We just wanted to make sure you were still coming." "I'm on my way." He hung up and rubbed both hands across his face. Every minute mattered. The center stayed open late for emergencies, but he hated the thought of his 8-year-old daughter sitting by the window wondering why every other child had already gone home. The rain began just as he pulled into the supermarket parking lot. He hadn't planned to stop. But Lily had finished the last box of cereal that morning, and all they had left in the apartment was half a loaf of bread and peanut butter. He hurried inside, bought the cheapest cereal he could find, and carried the small paper bag under one arm as he jogged back outside. Cold rain slapped against the pavement. Shopping carts rattled through puddles. Headlights reflected across the soaked asphalt like streaks of melted gold. Then he heard it. A heavy cough. Not the kind someone cleared from their throat, the kind that bent a person's entire body. An elderly man stood beside an old sedan with one hand gripping the trunk lid. His coat was soaked through. As another violent cough shook him, one grocery bag slipped from his fingers. Then another. Within seconds, all 6 bags crashed onto the wet pavement. Apples rolled beneath parked cars. A carton of eggs cracked open. Canned soup scattered across the asphalt. The old man tried to kneel, but nearly collapsed instead. People noticed, then kept walking. A young couple hurried past without slowing down. A man pushing a shopping cart frowned, shook his head, and muttered, "Probably shouldn't be driving at his age." Someone else laughed. "Looks like he's had too much to drink." Marcus looked at his watch. 16 minutes. If traffic stayed light, he might still reach Lily before she started worrying. If. He took one step toward his truck, then stopped. His wife's voice drifted into his memory as clearly as if she were standing beside him. Kindness doesn't wait until life becomes convenient. Emily had been gone for almost 4 years. Sometimes Marcus could still hear her anyway. He looked once more toward the supermarket exit, then back at the old man struggling to gather broken groceries with trembling hands. Marcus let out a slow breath. "So much for perfect timing," he whispered. He jogged through the rain. "Sir." The old man looked up, embarrassed more than frightened. "I'm fine," he insisted between coughs. I've got it." "No, you don't." Marcus knelt without another word. He picked up the dented cans before they floated into a puddle. He rescued the loaf of bread before a passing tire splashed muddy water over it. The eggs were beyond saving. "So much for breakfast," Marcus joked with a small smile. For the first time, the old man's expression softened. "I'm afraid I made quite a mess." "Happens to all of us." Marcus gathered everything into the remaining bags, shifting the weight across both arms. "They're heavier than they look," he said. "I shouldn't have tried carrying them alone." "Where's your family?" The question hung in the rain. The old man hesitated. "Not nearby." Marcus noticed there was no one coming. No worried son, no daughter, no neighbor. Nothing except the steady sound of rain tapping against the empty parking lot. I can call someone, Marcus offered. The man slowly shook his head. There isn't anyone to call. Marcus studied the frail figure for a moment. Then let me walk you home. Oh, I couldn't ask that. You didn't. The old man looked at the 6 grocery bags, then at Marcus's soaked work boots and faded heating company jacket. You'll be late. Marcus smiled faintly. I'm already late. His phone buzzed again. Lily. He stared at the screen for 2 long seconds before sending a quick message. Running a little late, sweetheart. Stay with Mrs. Donovan. Daddy's coming. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. He slipped the phone back into his pocket before doubt could change his mind. The old man pointed weakly down the road. It's about 3 miles. Marcus blinked. 3? I'm afraid my car won't start again. Marcus laughed softly despite himself. Well, guess we're getting our steps in. He lifted all 6 grocery bags, adjusted their weight across his aching shoulders, and the 2 men began walking through the steady rain. For nearly 20 minutes they passed bus stops, quiet neighborhoods, and rows of glowing porch lights. The old man apologized every few minutes. Marcus answered the same way every time. It's okay. Eventually the streets grew wider, the sidewalks cleaner, the homes larger. Marcus frowned. This isn't exactly the neighborhood I expected. Neither was what came next. The old man pressed a small remote in his pocket. Massive wrought iron gates slowly swung open without a sound. Beyond them stood an elegant estate stretching across perfectly trimmed lawns, its warm lights glowing through towering windows. Marcus stopped walking. Rain dripped from his jacket as he stared through the open gates. The man he'd thought had nowhere to go had just led him to one of the grandest homes Marcus had ever seen. The driveway curved through rows of maple trees, glowing beneath old-fashioned lanterns. Water shimmered across perfectly trimmed hedges, and a stone fountain rested silently in the center circle, its pumps apparently turned off for the storm. The house itself looked less like a home and more like something preserved from another century. Marcus shifted the 6 grocery bags in his aching hands. I think you have the wrong address, he said, with an awkward laugh. The old man smiled faintly. I've lived here for 43 years. Before Marcus could answer, the front door opened. An elderly woman in a navy cardigan hurried onto the porch with an umbrella. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, and genuine relief washed across her face the moment she saw the old man. Mr. Brooks, she called. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. I'm afraid I underestimated both the weather and my legs. She rushed down the steps, taking his arm with surprising strength before noticing Marcus standing in the rain. And this gentleman? He rescued my groceries, and probably me. Her eyes moved to Marcus's soaked work jacket and muddy boots. Please, come inside before you catch pneumonia. Marcus instinctively shook his head. I appreciate it, ma'am, but my daughter's waiting for me. It will only take a minute, the woman insisted. At least let me make you a cup of coffee while Mr. Brooks changes. Marcus hesitated. His phone remained silent. He prayed Lily had found another coloring book. Inside, warmth wrapped around him almost instantly. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace. The air smelled faintly of cedar wood and fresh bread instead of expensive perfume or polished marble. The house was beautiful, but strangely quiet. His boots echoed across polished hardwood floors that should have been filled with voices. His eyes wandered to the photographs lining the walls. There were dozens. A smiling woman holding hands with Walter beside a lake. A young man in a graduation gown. A family gathered around a Christmas tree. Every frame stopped several years ago. No recent birthdays, no grandchildren, no vacations, only memories. The elderly housekeeper returned carrying 2 towels. I'm Helen, she said warmly. I've looked after this house longer than I care to admit. Marcus accepted one gratefully. Marcus Hayes. And your little girl? He smiled despite himself. Lily, 8 years old. Helen's face softened. She must be worried. She probably is. Walter disappeared upstairs, leaving Marcus standing alone beside the fireplace. The silence settled over the room again, interrupted only by the ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere down the hallway. For a house this large, It felt remarkably empty. Walter returned a few minutes later, wearing a dry sweater and carrying a small wooden box. "I owe you more than a thank you." He opened the lid. Inside rested several crisp $100 bills. Marcus immediately raised a hand. "No, sir." Walter blinked. "You walked 3 miles in the rain carrying 6 bags that I shouldn't have tried lifting myself." "I didn't do it for money." "Then think of it as compensation for your time." Marcus looked down at the bills before quietly closing the lid. "My wife used to tell me something." Walter listened. If you help somebody only because you're hoping they'll pay you back, it stops being kindness. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Walter studied Marcus as though he had heard something almost forgotten. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was." Marcus slipped his damp jacket back on. "I really need to get to Lily." Walter nodded slowly. "At least let me send you home with a driver." "I'll manage." As Marcus walked toward the front door, something caught his eye in the adjacent study. Spread across an enormous oak table was a detailed city map. Dozens of small colored pins marked neighborhoods throughout the city. Most were clustered around apartment complexes and rental properties. Marcus frowned for just a second before looking away. It wasn't his business. He reached for the doorknob. "If you ever want to send Lily a thank you card," he said with a smile. "Apartment 3C, West Briar Homes." Walter repeated the address quietly, almost to himself. "West Briar." Marcus tipped his head politely. "Have a good evening, sir." "You too, Mr. Hayes." The front door closed softly behind him. Walter remained standing in the foyer long after Marcus disappeared into the rain. Finally, he turned toward Helen. "Call Evelyn first thing tomorrow morning." "The attorney?" Walter nodded. "I'd like to know everything there is to know about the man who refused my money." Outside, Marcus pulled his hood over his head and hurried toward the bus stop, never noticing Walter still watching from the tall front window as the rain swallowed him into the darkness. By the time Marcus reached the after-school center, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Only one classroom light remained on. Mrs. Donovan smiled with obvious relief as she unlocked the door. "I told her you'd come." "I always do," Marcus said, slightly out of breath. Lily looked up from a table covered in crayons and construction paper. Instead of running to him, she simply smiled the small, understanding smile that no 8-year-old should have learned so well. "You helped somebody again, didn't you?" Marcus blinked. "What makes you think that?" "You only get this late when somebody needs you." She slipped her tiny hand into his without another question. "I'm sorry." "It's okay, Daddy." The words were simple. The guilt wasn't. On the bus ride home, Lily leaned against his shoulder, quietly eating dry cereal straight from the box he'd bought. She chatted about spelling words, a drawing she'd made, and a classmate who wanted to trade lunches tomorrow. Marcus listened carefully, laughing in the right places, careful not to let his own worries interrupt the few peaceful minutes they still shared each day. Their apartment building came into view just before 8. West Briar Homes had once been painted cream. Now peeling paint exposed cracked concrete beneath, and several hallway lights had burned out months ago. The elevator carried a handwritten out-of-service sign that looked old enough to have become permanent. Marcus sighed. "Race you to the 3rd floor?" Lily giggled. "You're going to let me win." "I might." Halfway up the stairs, Lily stopped to catch her breath. "You okay?" She nodded a little too quickly. "Just tired." Marcus noticed the faint wheeze hiding behind her smile, but chose not to press her. Every doctor's visit meant another bill they couldn't afford. Inside apartment 3C, home consisted of 2 tiny bedrooms, worn furniture, and a kitchen barely large enough for both of them to stand in together. Yet everything was clean. Family photos covered one wall, and a framed picture of Emily rested beside a small lamp that Marcus switched on every evening without thinking. "Mom would have liked the rain today," Lily whispered. "She always said storms made the world smell new." Marcus smiled. "I remember." While Lily finished her homework, Marcus opened the mailbox mounted outside their apartment door. One envelope. Final notice. He already knew what it said before reading it. 3 months behind on rent. Payment required immediately. He folded the notice into his jacket before Lily could see it. Later that evening, a knock echoed through the hallway. Mrs. Alvarez, from apartment 3A, stood outside, holding an old wheelchair. The front wheel locked again. Marcus laughed softly. "I was wondering when it'd come back. You've worked all day." "I've still got a wrench." Within minutes, he was kneeling on the hallway floor with a flashlight between his teeth, tightening loose bolts and replacing a worn bearing from a box of spare parts he kept for neighbors who couldn't afford repairs. Mrs. Alvarez reached into her purse. "At least let me pay you." Marcus shook his head. "You've already paid me." "When?" "You make too many tamales every Christmas." She laughed until tears filled her eyes. As Marcus rolled the repaired wheelchair forward, he heard a quiet cough behind him. Lily stood in the doorway. She quickly lowered her hand from her mouth. "I'm okay," she insisted before he even asked. He wanted to believe her. Instead, he tucked her into bed a little earlier than usual. Long after Lily fell asleep, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table, beneath a flickering light bulb. The rent notice lay beside unpaid utility bills. His work gloves rested beside them. He stared at both for a long time. One represented everything he owed. The other represented everything he still had. Across town, Evelyn entered Walter Brooks' library carrying a slim leather folder. "I found him." Walter looked up from the fire. "What kind of man is Marcus Hayes?" Evelyn opened the file. "The kind that's very difficult to find these days." Walter leaned forward as she prepared to tell him a story far bigger than 6 grocery bags in the rain. Evelyn opened the folder, but instead of beginning with financial records, she slid several handwritten notes across Walter's desk. "These aren't bank statements," Walter observed. "No," she replied. "They're thank you letters." Walter picked up the first one. It was written in uneven handwriting by an elderly church volunteer. "Mr. Hayes fixed our furnace 3 days before Christmas. When I asked what I owed him, he smiled and said my payment was seeing everyone warm on Christmas Eve." Walter silently reached for another. "Our heat stopped during the coldest week last winter. Marcus repaired it after finishing his regular shift. He refused every dollar we offered." There were more: a widow, a disabled veteran, a daycare director. Each story was different. The ending never changed. "He doesn't advertise any of this," Evelyn said. "Most people I interviewed only mentioned him after I asked who had helped them when they couldn't afford repairs." Walter leaned back slowly. "And his work history?" Evelyn opened another section of the file. 5 years with Summit Residential Services. Walter recognized the company immediately. They handled maintenance for dozens of apartment complexes throughout the city. "He wasn't fired for poor performance," she continued. "In fact, every supervisor described him as one of their best technicians." "What happened?" "He refused to sign inspection reports." Walter frowned. "Inspection reports?" He discovered several apartment buildings were using cheaper replacement parts than the contracts required. Heating systems that should have lasted 15 years were failing after 5. He documented everything. Walter's expression hardened. "And?" "They asked him to sign paperwork stating the repairs met safety standards." "He refused." Evelyn nodded. 3 weeks later, his position was eliminated during what the company called a budget reduction. Walter stared into the fire. "I've heard that phrase before." "I imagine you have." She slid one final document across the desk. It was an internal maintenance report from nearly 4 years earlier. One corporate logo sat at the top of the page. Walter's eyes narrowed. "I know this logo." "You should. It's Brooks Property Holdings, the company your family built." Silence settled over the library. The flames cracked softly inside the fireplace. Walter read the document twice before speaking. "Summit Residential is one of your largest maintenance contractors," Evelyn finished. He removed his glasses. "I stepped away from daily operations after Margaret died." "I know. My board assured me everything was running properly." Evelyn hesitated. "I don't believe anyone ever intended for these reports to reach you." Walter looked back at the maintenance file. Marcus's signature line remained blank. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, someone had written, "Unsafe until proper parts are installed." Walter slowly traced the words with one finger. He risked his job for strangers. It appears he did. And now he lives in one of our buildings. West Briar Homes. Walter repeated the name quietly. West Briar. He remembered the address Marcus had spoken while pulling on his rain-soaked jacket. Apartment 3C. At that moment, another memory surfaced. The city map spread across his study table. West Briar had been marked with a red pin for months. He had never asked why. Evelyn. Yes? I want to inspect West Briar personally. She looked surprised. You haven't visited one of the properties yourself in years. Apparently, that's been my mistake. Across town, dawn was just beginning to brighten the narrow streets around West Briar Homes. Marcus loaded his worn toolbox into the back of his pickup before sunrise. As he tightened the latch, Mrs. Alvarez called from her balcony. My heater's still working. Marcus smiled. That's good news. You should charge people more. He laughed. People like you can't afford that. She folded her arms, and people like you can't afford giving everything away. Marcus didn't answer. He simply waved before climbing into the truck. As the engine started, Lily appeared at the apartment window, pressing her hand against the glass before leaving for school. Marcus smiled back. He drove away carrying the same quiet determination he carried every morning, never realizing that, across the city, Walter Brooks was preparing to discover just how badly his own company had failed people like Marcus Hayes. The black SUV rolled through the gates of West Briar Homes just after sunrise. Walter sat in the back seat without saying a word as Evelyn flipped through maintenance reports on her tablet. The regional office insists the property passed every inspection, she said. Walter looked out the window instead. Children stepped around puddles because the sidewalks were cracked. Rust stained the brick walls beneath broken gutters. A mother struggled to push a stroller up the front steps because the wheelchair ramp had partially collapsed months ago. None of it matched the photographs he received during quarterly board meetings. They never showed me this. They weren't supposed to. Walter slowly stepped out of the vehicle. The October air carried the smell of damp concrete and old furnace exhaust. An elderly resident wrestled a grocery cart toward the entrance before stopping in front of a handwritten sign taped across the elevator doors. Out of service. Walter stared at it. How long has the elevator been down? He asked. The old woman laughed without humor. You must be new around here. I suppose I am. Almost 5 months. Walter turned toward Evelyn. The report says it was repaired in July. It says that, she answered quietly. The old woman overheard them. Whoever wrote that never climbed 3 flights of stairs carrying groceries. She pushed her cart toward the staircase. Walter instinctively stepped forward. May I? She looked surprised. I can manage. I insist. He lifted the heavier bags while Evelyn carried the lighter ones. Each flight left Walter more breathless than the last. By the 3rd floor, he paused beside a rusted radiator that hissed unevenly. That thing hasn't worked right in years, the woman said. Neither have most of the heaters. Walter looked down the hallway. Apartment after apartment displayed weathered doors patched with mismatched paint. This wasn't neglect. It was abandonment. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus was replacing a furnace motor inside a modest family home. His supervisor, Ben Collins, appeared in the basement doorway. You've got visitors. Marcus frowned. I do? Conference room. When Marcus entered, 2 men in tailored suits were already waiting. One of them smiled professionally. Marcus Hayes? That's me. The taller man extended his hand. I'm Daniel Pierce, from Summit Residential. Marcus's smile disappeared. I don't work there anymore. We know. Daniel placed a folder on the table. Our company is expanding. Marcus folded his arms. I'm listening. We'd like you back. Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. You fired me. There were management decisions. You mean I refused to sign false inspection reports? The room fell quiet. Daniel cleared his throat. We're willing to put the past behind us. He slid a contract across the table. The salary was nearly double what Marcus currently earned. Health insurance, retirement, a signing bonus. For one brief moment, Marcus imagined Lily's inhaler prescriptions paid on time. The rent notice disappearing from the kitchen table. A little breathing room. Then he noticed the final page, a certification form. His eyes narrowed. What is this? A routine statement confirming previously completed maintenance met company standards. Marcus looked up slowly. The same buildings? Most of them. I've never seen those repairs finished. Daniel maintained his practiced smile. We're simply updating old paperwork. Marcus closed the folder. No. Daniel blinked. You haven't even considered. I have. Marcus stood. If those buildings still aren't safe, I'm not pretending they are. You realize what you're turning down? Marcus thought of Lily. He thought of overdue rent. He thought of every family sleeping beside furnaces he wouldn't trust in his own home. I know exactly what I'm turning down. He walked out without another word. Late that evening, Walter stood alone in the boiler room beneath Westbriar Homes. A maintenance technician removed the front panel from an aging heating unit. Walter frowned. The replacement valve isn't original. It isn't even certified, the technician replied grimly. What happens if it fails? The man hesitated before answering. In freezing weather? He looked up. Or if there's a gas leak? He didn't need to finish the sentence. Walter understood. As he stared at the patched pipes disappearing into the darkness above, his phone vibrated. Evelyn answered before handing it over. It's Victor Sloan, Walter's longtime operations director. Walter answered calmly. Victor. Mr. Brooks? Victor said smoothly. I heard you visited Westbriar today. Walter's eyes never left the damaged heating system. Yes. I'm sure our local staff can explain any misunderstandings. Walter rested one hand against the cold metal pipe. I believe they'll have quite a lot to explain. After the call ended, neither Walter nor Evelyn noticed the faint smell drifting through the boiler room. Natural gas, almost too weak to recognize. But somewhere above them, inside Westbriar Homes, the aging heating system had already begun leaking. The smell reached apartment 2B first. Mrs. Alvarez paused while stirring a pot of soup. That's strange, she murmured. She looked toward the old radiator hissing beneath the window. It had made odd noises for weeks, so she dismissed it and cracked the kitchen window open. On the third floor, Lily was already asleep with her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. Marcus sat at the kitchen table reviewing invoices from the day's work when his phone rang. It was Ben Collins. Marcus, sorry to bother you this late. Everything okay? I've got an emergency call across town. Furnace completely dead. Marcus glanced toward Lily's bedroom. I can't leave her alone. I figured. I'll send someone else. After hanging up, Marcus walked to Lily's room. She coughed softly in her sleep. He quietly adjusted her blanket before returning to the kitchen. Then he smelled it. Natural gas. His head snapped toward the hallway. He stepped outside. The odor was stronger now. Mrs. Alvarez opened her apartment door at the same moment. You smell that too? Marcus didn't answer. He was already moving. He rushed downstairs toward the boiler room, where the scent became unmistakable. His flashlight swept across aging pipes until it landed on a thin stream of bubbles forming around a cracked valve. Marcus's stomach tightened. No. He reached for his phone. No signal. The concrete walls swallowed every bar. He sprinted back upstairs 2 steps at a time. Everybody out, he shouted, pounding on apartment doors. Leave everything. Get outside now. A few doors opened immediately. Others stayed shut. People stared at him, confused. One man frowned. It's freezing out there. Marcus grabbed the man's arm. I'm not asking. Something deep inside the heating system groaned. Metal strained against metal. Marcus's voice became louder. Move! The hallway erupted into motion. Parents carried sleeping children. An elderly veteran struggled with his walker. Mrs. Alvarez couldn't push her wheelchair fast enough. Marcus lifted the front wheels over the broken threshold without slowing down. Stay with everyone outside, he told her. What about you? I've still got people upstairs. Across the street, neighbors noticed residents pouring out of the building. Someone finally dialed 911. Marcus charged back inside. Smoke had begun curling from a utility closet near the 4th floor stairwell. Not thick, not yet. He covered his mouth with his sleeve. Lily! Daddy! Her frightened voice echoed from the apartment. He burst through the door. Lily stood in the hallway wearing her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit with trembling hands. I told you to stay in your room. I heard you yelling. He scooped her into one arm. "It's okay." Another cough rattled through the building. This one came from the ceiling. A sharp pop echoed somewhere below. The lights flickered. Marcus froze. Every instinct told him the heating system was failing. He hurried Lily down 2 flights before handing her to Mrs. Donovan, who happened to live nearby and had rushed over after hearing the commotion. "Stay with her." Lily grabbed his jacket. "Don't go back." He knelt until their eyes met. "Mrs. Jenkins is on the 4th floor." "The lady with the cat?" He nodded. "I have to make sure she gets out." Tears filled Lily's eyes. "You promised you always come back." Marcus gently touched her cheek. "And I plan to keep that promise." Without waiting for another word, he turned and disappeared back into the smoke. Minutes later, the first fire engine screeched to a stop outside Westbriar Homes. Walter Brooks stepped out of the SUV that had just arrived for another inspection and stared in disbelief. Smoke drifted from the upper floors. Firefighters raced toward the entrance. Residents stood shivering in the parking lot wrapped in blankets. Walter spotted Evelyn speaking with an officer. "How many people are still inside?" "They're checking now." Just then, someone in the crowd pointed toward a 3rd-floor window. A figure appeared through the haze. Marcus. One arm supported an elderly woman. The other carried a frightened little boy who couldn't have been older than 6. Walter watched as Marcus guided them toward the stairwell before vanishing back into the smoke yet again. A firefighter beside Walter shook his head. "Whoever that man is." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Walter already knew. And, as another section of the aging heating system failed somewhere deep beneath the building, Victor Sloane's years of deception were about to place the blame on the one man risking everything to save lives. A thunderous boom echoed from beneath the building. The force rattled every window facing the parking lot. Flames burst through a basement ventilation grate before black smoke rolled into the night sky. Firefighters shouted for everyone to move farther back. Walter instinctively searched the crowd. "Lily!" Evelyn pointed toward an ambulance. "There." The little girl sat wrapped in a gray blanket, clutching her stuffed rabbit with both hands. Tears streaked her soot-covered cheeks as she stared at the apartment building. "He went back," she whispered to the paramedic. "Daddy promised he'd come back." Walter's chest tightened. Inside the building, visibility had nearly disappeared. Marcus could barely see beyond the beam of his flashlight. "Mrs. Jenkins," a weak voice answered from the apartment at the end of the hallway. "I'm here." He forced the swollen door open. The elderly woman sat trapped beside her overturned walker while an orange tabby cat hid beneath the kitchen table. Marcus lifted Mrs. Jenkins onto his shoulder. "Your cat." She pointed weakly. He reached beneath the table, tucked the frightened animal inside his jacket, and turned toward the hallway. Heat rushed through the corridor. The ceiling groaned. A firefighter finally reached him from the stairwell. "Sir, we've got her." Marcus carefully transferred Mrs. Jenkins into the firefighter's arms. "What about you?" "I'm right behind you." He wasn't. As the others descended, Marcus noticed movement inside apartment 4D. A little boy stood crying beside the doorway. Marcus's heart dropped. He ran. The child's grandmother had collapsed trying to reach him. Within seconds, Marcus had the boy in one arm and helped the older woman onto the other. The smoke became almost unbearable. His lungs burned with every breath. Halfway down the stairs, his knees buckled. 2 firefighters rushed upward just in time. "We've got them!" Marcus handed the child over first, then the grandmother. Only after everyone else was safely moving outside did his legs finally give out. The last thing he remembered was someone pulling the digital watch from his wrist to check his pulse before darkness swallowed everything. Outside, applause broke out as firefighters emerged carrying Marcus. Residents who had never spoken more than a greeting now stood crying openly. Mrs. Alvarez covered her mouth. "He came back." Lily ran toward the stretcher until a paramedic gently stopped her. "He's breathing," the medic assured her, "but he needs oxygen." Walter stood silently beside the ambulance as doctors worked over Marcus. His clothes were blackened with soot. His hands were covered in fresh burns. Yet the first words Marcus whispered after regaining consciousness were barely audible. "Did everyone get out?" The paramedic smiled. "Yes." Marcus closed his eyes with visible relief. Across town, Victor Sloan watched live television from his office. The reporter stood outside West Briar Homes. Early reports indicate a heating system failure may have caused tonight's explosion. Victor muted the television. He picked up his phone. "Get me the legal department." Within an hour, a carefully prepared statement reached every local newsroom. It claimed that an off-duty former maintenance technician had entered restricted mechanical areas before the explosion. The implication spread faster than the facts. By sunrise, headlines began appearing online. Former technician questioned after apartment explosion. Witnesses say man was inside boiler room before fire. Marcus woke inside a hospital room to the sound of monitors beeping softly. His throat felt raw. His chest ached every time he breathed. A police detective stood quietly near the window. "Mr. Hayes?" Marcus looked over. "I need to ask you a few questions. What happened?" "There was an explosion." "I know." The detective hesitated. "Some evidence suggests you accessed the building's heating equipment before the fire." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "I smelled a gas leak." "Can anyone confirm that?" "I warned people to evacuate." "That's not what I asked." Before Marcus could answer, the hospital television switched to the morning news. His own photograph filled the screen. The words beneath it felt like another explosion. "Person of interest in West Briar gas blast." Down the hallway, Lily caught sight of the broadcast from the waiting room. She looked from the television to the closed hospital door, then back again. With frightened eyes, she whispered the one question no child should ever have to ask. "Why are they saying my daddy hurt people when he saved them?" Walter had no answer. He knelt beside Lily until they were eye level. "They're wrong," he said quietly. The little girl searched his face. "Then why doesn't anyone tell them?" Walter looked through the hospital window toward Marcus's room. "Because the truth sometimes arrives later than the lie." Lily lowered her head and squeezed her stuffed rabbit. "I just want my daddy to come home." Walter gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "So do I." Across the hall, Evelyn finished speaking with the fire marshal. "The explosion started in the basement mechanical room," she reported, "but investigators believe the leak had been building for quite some time." Walter nodded. "Can they prove it?" "Not yet." "What about the maintenance records?" She hesitated. "Some files are missing." Walter's expression hardened. "Missing?" "The digital copies were deleted shortly after midnight." Walter knew exactly what that meant. Someone wasn't protecting the company. Someone was protecting themselves. Meanwhile, inside a downtown office, Victor Sloan watched another news broadcast. The headlines were working exactly as he hoped. Marcus Hayes had become the story, not the neglected buildings, not the falsified inspections. Victor calmly closed his laptop before dialing another number. "I need every paper inspection file collected." The voice on the other end answered nervously. "Some of them are archived." "Then destroy the archives. And if someone asks, they won't." He ended the call without another word. Back at the hospital, Marcus had been released from intensive care, but remained under observation. His hands were wrapped in fresh bandages. His breathing still came with effort. A detective stood once again beside his bed. "We searched the boiler room." Marcus looked up. "And?" "We found evidence someone had worked on the system." "I told you there was a leak." The detective folded his notebook. "We also found your fingerprints." Marcus gave a tired smile. "Of course you did." The detective frowned. "I shut the emergency valve." Silence filled the room. "I touched those pipes because I was trying to keep the building from exploding." The detective made another note. "Can anyone verify that?" Marcus slowly shook his head. "I was alone." The detective thanked him and quietly left. Walter entered only seconds later. For a moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "Did everyone survive?" Walter smiled for the first time in 2 days. "Yes." Marcus closed his eyes with relief. "That's all I cared about." Walter pulled a chair closer. "I owe you an apology." Marcus looked confused. "For what?" "For trusting reports instead of people." Marcus didn't understand. Walter wasn't ready to explain everything. Not yet. Instead, he asked a different question. When you entered that boiler room, Marcus interrupted, I noticed something. Walter leaned forward. The replacement valve. It wasn't factory certified. Walter nodded. I found that too. Marcus looked toward the ceiling as if replaying every detail. There was something else. What? My watch. Walter frowned. What about it? I took it off. You removed your watch? Marcus nodded weakly. The flashlight battery died. So? My watch has a small emergency light. Walter suddenly remembered seeing paramedics remove the digital watch from Marcus's wrist. Where is it now? I'm not sure. Marcus closed his eyes, concentrating. I clipped it onto a pipe while checking the leak. Walter's heartbeat quickened. If it was left there, Evelyn immediately understood. It may still be inside the mechanical room. Walter stood. The building is sealed. So we'll get permission. Hours later, wearing protective gear, investigators carefully entered the damaged basement. The watch was still there, blackened by smoke, covered in dust. Hanging exactly where Marcus remembered, a technician carefully removed it. The screen's dead. Walter looked disappointed. Then the technician noticed something unusual. This model has a memory slot. He carefully opened the side compartment. Inside rested a tiny microSD card. Walter exchanged a glance with Evelyn. Marcus had always carried digital copies of equipment manuals, wiring diagrams, and inspection notes for emergency service calls. If the card had survived, it might contain far more than anyone expected. Far across town, another employee quietly fed stacks of maintenance records into an industrial shredder. Paper disappeared forever. But neither Victor Sloan nor anyone working for him knew that the most important evidence had never been stored in a filing cabinet. It had been hanging from a burned pipe on the wristwatch of the man they were trying to blame. The memory card was barely larger than a fingernail. A forensic technician placed it into a recovery computer while Walter and Evelyn waited behind the glass. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then folders began appearing on the screen. Data recovered, the technician announced. Walter let out a slow breath. Open the inspection files. Hundreds of documents filled the monitor. Every service call Marcus had completed over the past 5 years had been carefully organized by date, address, and equipment number. There were photographs, handwritten notes, repair estimates, and voice recordings Marcus had made after long shifts so he wouldn't forget details before writing formal reports. The technician clicked on a folder labeled West Briar Homes. Inside were dozens of photographs. Walter stared silently. Each image showed the heating system years before the explosion. Cracked valves, improper replacement parts, corroded gas fittings. One photograph included a timestamp from nearly 3 years earlier. Beneath it, Marcus had written, Immediate replacement required. Risk of gas leak if temporary valve remains in service. Another file contained a scanned inspection report. The signature line assigned to Marcus remained empty. Below it appeared the same sentence Walter had already seen. Unsafe until proper parts are installed. Evelyn looked toward Walter. He warned them, repeatedly. There are more. She opened an email draft Marcus had saved after the company server repeatedly rejected his reports. It listed every defective component by serial number. The message had never been delivered. Walter slowly removed his glasses. This wasn't negligence. No, it was buried. Later that afternoon, 2 independent mechanical engineers examined the recovered files alongside the damaged equipment removed from West Briar. Their conclusion came quickly. The photographs match the recovered parts exactly, one engineer explained. The defective valve installed years ago is the same valve that failed during the incident. And if it had been replaced when Mr. Hayes documented the problem? The engineer answered without hesitation. The explosion almost certainly would not have occurred. Walter closed his eyes. The weight of those words settled heavily across his shoulders. Across the city, Victor Sloan entered his office expecting another ordinary morning. Instead, one of his assistants hurried inside. The investigators recovered additional evidence. Victor barely looked up. What kind? A memory card. His expression changed. What memory card? They're saying it belonged to Marcus Hayes. For the first time in years, Victor's confidence faltered. What was on it? We don't know yet. Victor stood so abruptly, his chair rolled backward. Find out. Within an hour, another phone call reached him. His face grew pale as he listened. They recovered the inspection photos. Silence. They also found the original reports. Victor slowly lowered the phone. They weren't supposed to exist. He opened a locked cabinet hidden behind a bookshelf. Inside sat several thick binders labeled with maintenance contracts dating back years. He stared at them for only a moment before pulling them out one by one. No one can see these. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly in his hospital room, watching Lily color pictures beside his bed. She held up a drawing of the two of them standing beneath a rainbow. That's us after you come home. Marcus smiled. I like that. A gentle knock interrupted them. Walter stepped inside, carrying the recovered digital watch. Marcus looked surprised. You found it. Walter placed the watch carefully into Marcus's bandaged hand. It helped save you. Marcus frowned. I don't understand. Walter pulled a chair beside the bed. I think it's finally time you knew who I really am. The room grew still. My name is Walter Brooks. Marcus nodded politely. I know, but you don't know what that means. Walter looked directly into his eyes. I founded Brooks Property Holdings. Marcus's smile slowly disappeared. The company that owns West Briar? Walter nodded. Yes. Silence filled the room. Lily looked back and forth between the two men without understanding. Marcus stared at Walter for several long seconds. Then he quietly asked the only question that mattered. If you owned those buildings? His voice remained calm. How did people get left living like that? Walter lowered his head. For the first time in many years, he had no excuse, only regret. Walter remained standing beside the hospital bed, his shoulders carrying a weight no fortune could lift. When my wife passed away, he said quietly, I buried myself in grief. I stopped visiting properties. I stopped asking difficult questions. I trusted reports instead of people. Marcus listened without interrupting. I convinced myself the company could run without me. Walter looked down at his hands. I was wrong. Marcus glanced toward Lily, who continued coloring, unaware that the conversation would change all three of their lives. You weren't the one who installed those parts, Marcus finally said. No. You didn't order those reports to be hidden. No. But it happened under your name. Walter nodded. And that responsibility is mine. Marcus held his gaze for several seconds. Then he spoke with quiet honesty. I can forgive a mistake. Walter waited, but people kept living in danger for years. The words landed harder than any accusation. Walter accepted them without defending himself. I know. Before either man could continue, Evelyn stepped into the room carrying a thick folder. The emergency board meeting starts in an hour. Walter stood. Has everyone arrived? Every board member. And Victor? He's there. Walter turned back toward Marcus. I'd like you to come. Marcus looked at the bandages covering his hands. I'm not exactly dressed for a boardroom. I don't need a perfect appearance. Walter's voice was calm but firm. I need the truth. 2 hours later, the executive boardroom overlooking downtown was filled with tense silence. News of the explosion had already damaged the company's reputation. Directors whispered among themselves as Victor Sloan entered, wearing his usual confident smile, until he noticed Walter and Marcus walking in together. Victor's expression froze for only a fraction of a second before returning to practiced composure. Mr. Brooks, he said pleasantly, I'm relieved you're feeling well. Walter didn't answer. He simply took his seat. Victor looked toward Marcus. I'm surprised to see Mr. Hayes here. Marcus met his eyes without speaking. Walter opened the meeting. For years, we've trusted maintenance reports prepared under Mr. Sloan's supervision. Victor nodded. Correct. Walter placed a memory card on the conference table. Yesterday, we recovered evidence. Victor's smile faded. Evelyn connected her laptop to the large screen. One photograph appeared, then another. Cracked gas valves, corroded fittings, unsigned inspection reports, timestamps stretching back years. The room grew silent. An independent engineer stood. My team examined both the recovered files and the damaged equipment. He displayed 2 photographs side by side. They match. Another engineer added quietly. The failures documented by Marcus Hayes were never corrected. Victor leaned forward. Those files could have been altered. Evelyn calmly handed each director certified forensic reports. The metadata confirms every image was created years before the explosion. Victor looked toward the board. There must be some misunderstanding. Marcus finally stood. I tried to stop this. His voice remained steady. I refused to sign reports saying those buildings were safe. He looked directly at Victor. You offered me my job back if I'd sign them anyway. Several directors exchanged shocked glances. Victor quickly replied, There's no proof that conversation ever happened. Walter slowly slid another document across the table. A payroll authorization bearing Victor's electronic approval. Attached to it was the employment offer sent to Marcus only 1 day before the explosion. The room fell completely silent. Victor's confidence finally cracked. He stopped. There was nothing left to say. Walter rose from his chair. Effective immediately, Victor Sloan is suspended from all duties pending a full criminal and civil investigation. Security officers waiting outside quietly entered the room. Victor looked around the table. No one defended him. No one spoke. As he was escorted toward the door, he glanced once more at Marcus. The man he had tried to blame had become the witness who exposed everything. When the doors closed behind Victor, Walter remained standing before the board. The company failed these families. He looked toward the city skyline beyond the glass, and I failed them by believing paperwork instead of people. No one argued, because no one could. Walter turned toward Marcus one last time. The investigation will continue. He paused. But before we discuss rebuilding buildings, a faint smile touched his face. I'd like to discuss rebuilding something far more important. Marcus wasn't sure what Walter meant, but somehow, for the first time since the night of the explosion, the future no longer felt quite so dark. 3 days later, Marcus was discharged from the hospital. The burns on his hands still stung beneath fresh bandages, and every deep breath reminded him of the smoke he had carried out of West Briar. Yet the first thing he wanted to do was go home. When the taxi stopped in front of the apartment building, the entire courtyard was waiting. Mrs. Alvarez was the first to reach him. You stubborn young man, she said through happy tears. You scared us half to death. One by one, neighbors stepped forward. A father whose son Marcus had carried through the smoke. Mrs. Jenkins, holding the orange tabby cat that refused to leave her arms. Children waving handmade cards covered in crooked hearts and colorful crayon drawings. No speeches, no cameras, just people who were alive because one man had refused to walk away. Lily wrapped both arms around her father as tightly as she could. I told everyone you'd come home. Marcus kissed the top of her head. I promised. Late that afternoon, a black sedan quietly pulled into the parking lot. Walter stepped out alone. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit this time, only a simple navy sweater and an old wool coat. Marcus met him outside while Lily played nearby with the neighborhood children. Walter looked around the worn buildings. They've already started replacing every unsafe system. Marcus nodded. I heard. But replacing pipes isn't enough. Walter reached into his coat and removed a single envelope. I have something I'd like you to consider. Marcus opened it. Inside was an official letter from Brooks Property Holdings. His eyes paused on the title, Director of Community Housing Restoration. He looked back up. You want me to run this? Walter smiled. I want you to help rebuild every property we neglected. Marcus continued reading. The salary was generous. Full medical coverage, paid education for Lily through college. Most people would have accepted before reaching the second page. Instead, Marcus quietly folded the letter. I'm not the right man. Walter seemed unsurprised. Why? I've never managed a corporation. I don't need a corporate executive. Walter looked directly at him. I need someone who notices a broken heater before reading a spreadsheet. Marcus remained silent. I need someone who refuses to sign papers when families aren't safe. Still, Marcus hesitated. What if I fail? Walter smiled gently. You've already proven something far more important. Marcus frowned. What? That you'll tell the truth even when it costs you. For several moments, neither man spoke. Lily wandered over carrying the picture she had drawn in the hospital. She handed it to Walter. The rainbow now stretched over 3 people: Marcus, Lily, Walter. "You forgot someone," Walter said with a smile. "I didn't," Lily answered. "You belong there now." Walter's eyes filled with emotion. Marcus looked at the drawing, then at the apartment building behind them. Finally, he looked back at the letter. "I'll accept." Walter's smile widened. Marcus raised one finger. "But only under one condition." Walter waited. "No family ever waits years for a safe home because profits came first," Walter answered without hesitation. "Agreed." "And if I tell you something needs fixing," Walter chuckled softly, "you'll never have to convince me twice again." They shook hands. Not as billionaire and tenant, not as employer and employee, but as 2 men who had both learned that responsibility wasn't measured by wealth. It was measured by the lives entrusted to your care. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Lily slipped her small hand into Marcus's. "Does this mean we're moving?" Marcus smiled. "Maybe someday." She looked around the courtyard where neighbors were laughing together, despite everything they had endured. "I kind of like it here." Marcus laughed. "So do I." Because for the first time in many years, home no longer felt like a place they were struggling to escape. It had become the place where a better future had finally begun. 1 year later, the first snow of December settled quietly across West Briar homes. Only now, it looked like a different neighborhood. Fresh brickwork replaced cracked walls. Bright hallway lights welcomed families home each evening. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime instead of displaying another handwritten apology. New heating systems hummed steadily beneath every building, inspected twice by independent engineers before winter arrived. Children laughed outside without parents worrying whether the apartments behind them were safe. Marcus walked through the courtyard carrying a clipboard instead of a toolbox. He still stopped to tighten loose railings or answer maintenance questions himself. Old habits never left him, neither did humility. "Morning, Director Hayes," one employee called. Marcus smiled. "Just Marcus." The young technician laughed. "Everyone keeps telling me that." Marcus pointed toward a newly planted maple tree. "That handrail needs another inspection." The technician nodded. "I'll take care of it." "No," Marcus replied kindly. "We'll take care of it." Those words had quietly become the culture of every Brooks property. Across town, Walter Brooks stood before the company's annual meeting. This year, there were no polished promises, only accountability. Every inspection report would now be reviewed by independent engineers. Anonymous employee reporting systems had been established. Resident safety committees had real authority. Bonuses would never again be tied to cutting maintenance costs. Instead, they would be tied to keeping families safe. When Walter finished speaking, the room remained silent for several moments before rising in sustained applause. Not because he was wealthy, because he had finally chosen responsibility over reputation. Later that afternoon, Walter visited West Briar carrying a small pie Helen had insisted he deliver herself. He found Lily sitting on the front steps reading aloud to Mrs. Alvarez. The little girl looked up and smiled. "Grandpa Walter!" Walter's eyes softened every time she called him that. "I'm afraid Helen baked enough pie for an entire neighborhood," Mrs. Alvarez laughed. "Then you'd better come inside." The community room filled quickly. Neighbors shared food across long folding tables. Children chased one another between rows of chairs. No one seemed to notice that one of the richest men in the state was quietly washing dishes beside everyone else. And that was exactly how Walter preferred it. As evening settled outside, Lily carefully carried 3 plates to the dinner table inside Marcus's apartment. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "We're only 3 people," Lily smiled knowingly. "I know." She placed the 3rd plate in front of Walter. "You always say nobody should eat alone." Walter looked at the empty chair for a long moment before sitting down. For years, his mansion had echoed with silence despite having more rooms than he could count. Now, inside a modest apartment, surrounded by laughter and the smell of homemade soup, he finally understood what had been missing. It had never been space. It had been family. After dinner, snowflakes drifted softly beyond the window. Marcus stood beside Walter, watching children build snowmen beneath the new courtyard lights. "You know," Walter said quietly, I thought carrying those grocery bags home was the favor you did for me. Marcus smiled. It wasn't? Walter shook his head. No. He looked toward Lily, who was laughing with Mrs. Alvarez. You carried me back to the kind of life I almost forgot how to live. Marcus didn't answer. Some truths didn't need more words. They simply deserved gratitude. Before leaving that evening, Walter paused at the apartment door. If Emily could see you now, he said softly, I think she'd be proud. Marcus looked toward the photograph resting on the bookshelf. I hope so. The door closed gently behind Walter. Marcus switched off the kitchen light. Lily slipped her hand into his as they looked out over the peaceful neighborhood. A year earlier, one small act of kindness had begun with 6 grocery bags in the rain. No one could have imagined it would rescue not only a community, but 2 fathers who had each been carrying burdens far heavier than anyone could see. Because kindness is never measured by the reward it brings. Its true power is found in the lives it quietly rebuilds. And sometimes, home isn't the place you inherit, it's the family you choose through compassion, courage, and love. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and share the kindness forward. You never know whose life might change because someone chose to stop and help. When Lily quietly placed a 3rd dinner plate on the table for Walter, she reminded us that the greatest homes aren't built with money. They're built when someone who was once a stranger becomes family. Sometimes the smallest seat at the table carries the biggest meaning. Marcus never stopped doing the right thing, even when people blamed him for a disaster he tried to prevent. A single courageous choice made in the hardest moment can change far more lives than we ever imagine. Today, when you see someone carrying a burden that looks too heavy, don't walk past without asking if they need a hand. Marcus didn't know those 6 grocery bags would change his life forever, and you never know what one brave decision might begin. If this story stayed with you, comment 1 below. I'd love to know what moment touched your heart the most, and before you go, stay with us, because the next story begins with another ordinary moment that no one realized would change everything.